We're going to have a look at how you use isotope ozone to further your mastering experience. It's a specific piece of software that will allow you to go into much more detail and have just a much smoother mastering experience. It'll give you more confidence. There is one copy available at college, and you insert the dongle. You get the dongle from the techs, and you insert the dongle, and then you can load Ozone. I think it's Ozone 7 that we have, and I'm going to be working on Ozone 8, and the newest one is Ozone 9. So they're all fairly similar. They obviously just add more and more bits onto them, but the essential experience is much the same and doesn't look that much different. So this video is still going to be helpful to you. So I'm going to do this in Logic, but you can use Ozone in any DAW, and you can use it as a standalone application as well. I tend to use it as a plugin within Wavelab when I master, but it works just as well in every single DAW that I've tried it in. Let's get into it. I've imported this track, and it's an unmastered track. The main thing about that track is that we don't really want it to be peaking too high at the start. So let's just check that. I've been down this road before. Face all twisted, sprout out. It's peaking at about -7, -6, which is fine. Okay, so we're going to insert Ozone across the stereo master bus. You could put it across the channel itself that the track is on, but I prefer to put it on the final output, because if you change the level of any following fader, that can disturb the settings that you've actually set within Ozone. So I tend to put it at the last stage that you possibly can. Okay, so Ozone it's a multi-module application, which includes things like equalizer, EQ, multiband dynamics, limiters, and quite a few different other modules as well, such as an exciter that I often use and an imager that I often use as well. And it's also got some things like vintage modules, such as tape emulation, vintage EQ emulation, which is a bit like a Pultec, and vintage compressor emulation, which is a bit like a Fairchild 670 limiter. So you can just click those and they will appear in the chain, and here's the chain. It's much like your chain within Ableton. You can change those modules around, and it's just that's the order of play. So by changing the order of your plugins within the chain, you can get slightly different results. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of that exciter for now, and we are going to build these up as we go. So I'm just going to start with the EQ. Now this EQ gives you two options straight away, an analog and a digital one. The analog option includes some of the imperfections that you would expect with any analog EQ, where slight amplification changes, like where you boost and cut, also changes the phase of the frequencies very slightly, and they're copying how that actually happens in the real world with real circuits. Sometimes that imparts quite a nice sound, and lots of the famous old analog desks, they do change the phase relationship very slightly, and that is part of their sound. So that's the analog mode, and the digital mode is kind of like the clean version of EQ. So anything that you're boosting and cutting will not change the phase relationship. And indeed, you can actually manipulate the phase relationship on the digital mode if you want to, because you've got a phase slider. So you could actually grab a node and actually change the phase relationship of that particular frequency. So the digital EQ is much more powerful than you would be normally seeing in a DAW EQ. You've got up to 8 different nodes, so not as many as you'd get in something like a Fab Filter EQ, but still plenty to work with, and I think you can do everything with 8 bands. The other thing that this EQ offers is not only a mid-side option, which separates those 8 bands into 2 sets of 4, so you've got 4 bands to manipulate mid signals, i.e. things that are panned into the center, and then you've got 4 nodes that can manipulate the outer edges or the side signal, and you just flip between the two here, and they're completely separate, but they're all accessible within the same EQ, which is really nice. And you know, a lot of the switching is completely seamless. You won't get any clicks, you won't get any level differences. It's really easy to use. The other mode is left-right mode, and that means you get 4 nodes for the left and 4 nodes for the right. So you could EQ your signal completely differently on both sides. Okay, right, so that's analog digital and left and right. Or you could switch just back to straight stereo. The other nice things that we see are there's always a gain match. This was introduced in Ozone 8, I believe, the gain matching. But what that means is that any boosting and or cutting that you do, which has an impact on the overall level of the signal, that can be equalized. So if you switch that on, the only thing that will be changing is the frequency shift rather than the overall level. And you can bypass silently the module. Okay, right, let's get into it. So EQ. This is a drum and bass track, obviously, so we're going to try and boost up some of the bottom end on this track. I'm going to do it in middle and side. This track might get mastered onto vinyl, you never know. So one of the things about vinyl is that you have to mono the bottom end. Now you can do that in a couple of different ways using Ozone, but this is the way that I tend to do it. We're in side mode, and on node 1 we can switch that to a high pass, and we're just going to roll up to around sort of 100 hertz, and we're going to also make that quite a steep cut, so no low frequencies will travel further than 100 hertz in the sides. Okay, you could do it flat if you wanted to, and we could change the steepness of the filter here, which is another option. Okay, so I'm also going to keep it onto analog mode because that tends to sound a little bit warmer, and I think this track needs a little bit of warming up. So flipping back to the mid side, let's have a look at the bass frequencies. Let's hear what we can do.
Maybe I've been down this road before. Face all twisted, sprout out on the floor. Sunset dawn, I'm lost in busy minds. Sitting down, no idea of the time.
Okay, so there is a need for some bass here, but first of all, we're gonna roll off the bottom end. You always need to do that, as you saw in the other video. So I'm going to push this first node down to 30 hertz, and we'll make that fairly steep at 30 hertz. But then we'll grab node 3 and we'll put that to low shelf mode, and we're going to boost up some of these frequencies around 100. These are small changes, that's still only 1.6 dB. You can change the scale in the settings up here. There are a couple of different modes as well. So the vintage mode is a much wider Q version. Baxandal is a different slope. Resonant, another slope again. So you have some preset settings. This one copies like a typical analog mixing desk slope. Remember, this is only affecting anything that's panned in the center, which usually is basses.
I've been down this road before. Face all twisted, sprawled out on the floor.
Lower mid is usually a problem. Let's see what we've got.
I'm lost in busy minds.
So this frequency here
Sitting down, no idea of the time.
is a little bit muffled on the
I
vocals.
took it too far. I think I took it too far. I think I took it too far. Lately I've been thinking I took it too far.
Switch to side mode. The other thing we want to do in the sides is usually like widen out the top end. So I'm going to switch to band 8, make it high shelf, and I'm going to lift that up a little. So there aren't that many high frequencies in the sides, so I'm just going to have to do quite a bit of a boost there. Before and after. That'll do for me for now. Let's get the dynamics. So we're going to look for dynamics. This is a multi-band dynamic compressor. We've got 4 different bands, and we're going to look at it all in one screen. You can either go one screen or 4 different screens where you're looking at each band separately. I prefer to look at it like this. If you hit that bands button, you can change everything simultaneously. So if we move one, it moves them all. First of all, we're going to move down the squash on the bottom end. If you remember from my previous video, we had a slow attack. Release around 50 or 60, so that's okay. We can also, this is a dual compressor limiter, so not only do we have 4 bands for the compression, we also have 4 bands of limiting, so we have 2 thresholds. This is the threshold for the compressor, but we've also got a secondary threshold to absolutely clamp down on the overall peak level. So we can bring that down to just above where the peak levels are hitting, and that will completely control that bottom end. Again, we can bypass. And we're going to do a similar sort of thing to the low mids, but a slightly different, slightly longer release. This is a more gentle approach. We're going to bring the ratio down. We're not going to limit this one just because it might have too much of an impact. This is adjusting the high frequency stuff that's going on. Again, we don't want the ratio too hard, and again we're going to do a similar thing here. Going to slightly squash those frequencies. The principle is that the more that we squash it down, the higher the overall peak level we can get without it clipping.
Since the dawn, I'm lost, spread out on the floor. Since the dawn, I'm lost in busy minds.
So it just boxes it off, I like to think of it as. Okay, and the next thing we're going to look at is an exciter. So again, it's a 4-band exciter. I always turn on the oversampling because that gives a clearer, better sound. We've got different types of excitement. Now, if some of you who've been coming to my hardware group, we've been talking about distorting things through the desk, and I've also done a couple of videos on harmonic excitement. So this is very much the same territory, but we've got some really interesting sort of models of certain types of harmonic excitement. The ones that I often use are tape and tube and warm. They're all well, the tape and the tube will give higher frequency boost, and the warm will lower things that are too bright. They round it off. So the warm is usually good for the top end, and the tape and the tube tend to bring out the upper mid frequencies quite nicely. So first of all, we'll try a little bit of tube excitement in the upper mids, but we're going to do that only on the sides. So we're going to flick to side and put the tube in there. That's what it's doing, right? Hopefully you can hear that. Slight difference there. It's just slightly crispier. That might be all we do, but there are other things we can do. Tape mode. Sorry, flick to the mids. Just put it into tape mode. You can squash the bottom end. So if we just solo that band, so those are the harmonics that are being created, but we can turn that right down in the mix. Just that little bit can add something quite nice to the sound. Bypass it on here. Slightly fatter. So a couple of things, that's a couple of things on the exciter. The other things that I tend to do are if there's a sibilance problem, you can use either the compressor, the multiband compressor, to squash down the upper mid frequencies, and you can also use the dynamic EQ. So the dynamic EQ is an EQ that has a threshold on it. So what we'll do is we'll switch it to mid, and the vocals are usually panned in the center. We'll just find a little section where there's vocal. because there's some sibilance up there. 7182 hertz. And so when we pull this down, this node, it's kind of like a threshold. And if we wanted to push that down even more, we can pull down the threshold. And that is kind of squashing that band. Slightly different to compression because it doesn't get stronger the more it compresses. It's just turning down the EQ by a certain amount, which is 3.7 dB. You can also turn it up the other way as well, so you can make things louder on a threshold. I won't do that now. Okay, so on to the next thing. Let's get the stereo imager. You'd usually want to be slightly widening out the top end and slightly making the bottom end more mono. We've done that on the EQ already, the monoing of the bottom end, but you can do it here as well. It's all split up into the same 4 bands. We're just going to be boosting the stereo width above 10K there. So let's try that. Got a nice meter here that's showing us the dispersion. Mono that there. If you wanted to see exactly what was going on in the bass, for instance, you can see that that's where it's fully boosted and that's where it's very mono, so it's taking up less width on the actual polar sample. So that's how as it was. It's not very mono as it is, but you could check the upper frequencies. They are quite mono or quite stereo already. So yeah, so there's fairly good stereo information already, and there's a chance that we don't really need to do this. I think that is quite nice. Again, let's bypass it. You can hear those hi-hats widen out. Okay, and final thing we're going to do, let's go to the Maximiser, which is a limiter. We're going to turn on True Peak. We are going to bring down the output level to -1 as we did in the other video, and this is our threshold. Okay, so that's the output level and that's the threshold. We've got our scale on here. It's set to LUFS. You can change that to different types of meters. At the moment I've got it on short-term LUFS. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to aim for 12 again. Also gain match it, so by bypassing it we can hear just what the limiting is doing to it. It's quite serious. It's dulling it down, so let's try a few different models. We want to keep the transients. what that's telling me is that there's too much bass in the mix. So we're going to go back to the start of that process. I'm going to bring this band down a little bit.
I'm lost in busy mind.
That's band 3.
Sitting down, no idea of the time. Maybe I've been down this road before. Face all twisted, sprawled out on the floor. Sunset dawn, I'm lost in busy mind. Sitting down, no idea of the time. Maybe I've been down this road before. Face all twisted, sprawled out on the floor. Sunset dawn, I'm lost in busy mind. Sitting down, no idea of the time. Maybe I've been down this road before. Face all twisted, sprawled out on the floor. Sunset dawn,
That's a bit of a better comparison by bypassing everything. So let's go back to here.
I'm lost in busy mind. Sitting down, no idea of the time.
We want it as close as we can. You can change the types.
Maybe I've
They'll all
been
change the
down
overall
this
tone
road
slightly.
before. Face all twisted, sprawled out on the floor. Sunset dawn, I'm lost in busy mind. Sitting down, no idea of
Quite
the
like that modern one.
time.
IRC3 is the more extreme version.
Maybe I've been down this road before. Face all twisted, sprawled out on the floor. Sunset dawn, I'm lost in busy mind.
Pumping's quite nice.
Sitting down, no idea of the time.
I'm going to leave it on pumping.
Maybe I've been down this road before. Face all twisted, sprawled out.
Another nice feature that this Ozone 8 has is you can learn the threshold, and you can just type in what you want your LUFS threshold to be, and it will put it there for you without having to adjust the threshold yourself. You can see it's moving it.
Sitting down, no idea of the time.
And there you go. There's an Ozone 8 chain of plugins. As you can see, there's lots of different extra features that we can bring into it, particularly the mid and the side and the analog and digital sort of characters of things. A couple of last features. You might wonder how this is going to translate if you change your file from a WAV to an MP3. So we've got a codec function. If we turn this on, when you turn on the codec function, you can see what it'll sound like when it's changed into either MP3 or AAC by changing the kilobits per second rate here. So I'll flick through a few of these.
Maybe I've been down this road before.
You can also have a listen to your mix in mono.
Face all twisted, sprawled out on the floor. Sunset dawn, I'm lost in busy mind.
And as you can see, you know, it's very seamless, it's smooth. The other thing you can do is you can put a reference in to your mix, and if we just call up a mix by somebody else, this is a pop, pop reference mix. We can actually listen.
You're really quite the man.
So we can hear that particular mix is way brighter, it's way harder sounding, and that might give us a steer on how we need to make our mix sound. It might tell you that your actual mix, original mix, is not finished enough and needs to be brighter, for instance. So, mastering should be working with the best mix possible, and if you haven't got that mix, then anything that you do in the master is not going to sort out a bad mix. And it's quite nice to have that feature, so you can load in a few different references, and that might give you a bit more of a a clear idea of where you're going. Okay, so that's Ozone 8. It's currently on Ozone 9. You can get student deals on Isotope stuff that are usually really good. Have fun using it.